So welcome to It's Not All About the Numbers podcast, the leadership podcast that doesn't just focus on the bottom line. Hello, my name is Chris and that is Mike.
Hi, everyone.
And our co-host today is a fellow Chris, Chris Ortega, CEO of Fresh FP&A, a fractional CFO. And I have to tell you, for the podcast, our very own Lewis Hamilton lookalike. Welcome, Chris.
Let's go. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mike. Thanks to be here, man. Happy to be here.
We'll dig into all things Chris, but just to kick things off, Mike, how's your week been?
It's been a busy week, weekend in particular. So lots of revision at the moment, lots of exams. It's coming up to exam time. Lots of exams in this household. Youngest is doing GCSEs, oldest is doing A levels. So I spent the weekend learning about the Sign of Four, the Sherlock Holmes mystery from the early last century.
I thought for a minute there you were doing the exams, but no. I thought, What exams can you be doing in transformation? That was done a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I try and avoid any exams now. But I know a lot more about Sherlock Holmes mysteries than I thought I would at this point in my life.
And Chris, how about yourself?
It's good, man. Just starting this week off, travel here from London yesterday, getting over the jet lag and just getting adjusted. The weather's actually nice. Yesterday, I got in on Sunday. Perfect weather, walked about 10 miles yesterday to kind of adjust. Got some of this great weather, great energy, man. So yeah, I'm ready for this weekend, excited about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know whether you brought the weather with you. Is it sunny? Where's home at the moment?
I'm actually in the Chelsea area, so it's one of those gloomy days today, but yesterday was absolutely perfect. It was nice outside. Everybody's outside running. I sat in the park for like 15 minutes and just was people watching. And I think people were watching me as well too. I got a couple like double takes of like Lewis Hamilton. Is that Lewis Hamilton sitting in the park right now?
I love it. Well, I'm glad we were able to have a quick chat about the weather, because that obviously introduces you to being very British and English, because that's what we do most of the time.
Hey man, you're welcome, man. You're welcome. And every time I come to London, it reminds me of Seattle. Like Seattle is our London in the US because it's always like gloomy and it's like you don't know if at any moment it's gonna rain and sunshine. So
talking of gloomy, I don't know, it's just someone who I associate with gloominess. Is that fair, Mike? I see you've got something in here about James O'Brien.
So I think it's unfair, but. So what I've suggested we talk about here is, I've just listened to James O'Brien's most recent Full Disclosure podcast, where he was interviewing a guy called James Timpson, who you may or may not have heard of, Chris. He manages he's the chief executive officer of a pea cutting and shoe repair business across UK and Ireland. But he is quite well known now for recruiting prisoners directly out of prison into his stores, and his approach to managing the company that he's got is quite unique, I think, in some respects. And he likes to call it upside down management, where he treats all of the frontline staff as like the kings and queens of the company. And basically his one rule is, if you put the money in, as long as you put the money in the till, you're free to do what you want with it, with regards sales and marketing within your business. So it was really interesting talk. So I highly recommend it. But one of the things he said, which I thought was really interesting for this podcast, was, and particularly this conversation, is when companies get into difficult times, quite often what happens is finance then takes over. And the implication of that is that finance comes in and starts trimming and cutting and pulling back on different things to try and save money because the company is struggling. And he mentioned a time when that happened in his organization, and what they actually did was go out and buy a series more holiday homes in across Europe for their staff to go out to, on the basis that their staff would then perform better and contribute more to the company. So I just wanted to sort of throw to you guys, what do you think about this premise that when companies have difficult times, finance comes in and takes over, brackets, and makes things worse?
Hang on a minute. I thought that's where you were going with it. So, Chris,
that was the implication.
I'll let you prepare your defense while I take a minute, right? But first of all, I've got to say that during the pandemic, right, a lot of CFOs, finance peoples absolutely proved their worth, right? because let's face it, when the shit hit the fan and revenues stopped overnight, there were many finance people who saved their organizations, right? Now, I get your point that there's a certain nuance, right, to cost cutting or financial management that is easy to pick apart. The James and James show, as it sounded like, we've got the Chris and Chris show today, but I don't think that's fair. Chris, what do you think? Do the accountants get it wrong?
Yeah, I think it's Chris, you talked about the pandemic, man. I think that's a prime example of where a lot of CFOs stepped up and set a new baseline, right? Like you think about during that time, and at that time I was at a software company, which our primary focus was working with retail and e-commerce businesses. 80% of our customer profile had bricks and mortars locations, right? So when you talk about overnight, their entire business changed, it was that opportunity for a lot of our sales, a lot of our marketing, a lot of those like leaders that think forward on the organization. They were like, look, this is a lot of challenge, this is a lot of adversity, we don't know how to navigate this. And that's where we stepped up, right? We wanted to, and in partnership with our CEO, there's three things that we focused on during that period, right? We want to make sure our customers were taken care of, not only having the solutions, the people, and the products that they needed to keep themselves in business. We wanted to make sure our employees were taken care of, right? And we also want to make sure as leaders, we were pulsing as much information to the business as possible. So, like, my example of that is, yeah, you come into it when it's challenging and adversity. That's really not the time for finance to take a step back. That's where we're really showing the true value that we bring to the business, right? I always look at myself and look at my experience, and I've always been like what I call myself a wartime CFO, meaning when it's like prosperous and everything's going good, money's going well, revenue's growing double digits, everything's fine. It's really hard to like truly master yourself. But when you have cost consciousness in the business, or you have your biggest customer leave, or you need to make pivots on your product, or you need to think about how you're extending out your runway, like that's really the time to buckle down. And in my experience, when it comes to that uncertainty and challenge, that's where I think the CFOs of the future really have an opportunity to reset that value proposition that we bring to the business.
I think that I think I touched a nerve there, which was quite good.
That was a grenade.
It was good. It was good. But actually, I think I agree with what you were just saying there. I think that what was being described is almost lazy financial management, right? Yeah. Which is you get into a problem and the easiest thing to do is cut costs. I think what you've just described there, Chris, is really interesting, is that in the future, it's much more important that finance and all bits of the business show their value add and actually think differently about how they do things. And it shouldn't always be the first thing we do is cut. It might be, oh, we've lost a big customer. Why? Where do we need to invest more? So I think that actually that was what was being described, is that pivot around to thinking more holistically.
I think it, and by the way, Mike, when you say Chris, I don't know what you want to call me, but let's say that Chris is Chris Ortega, and I'm the other one, right? Call me the other one. But Mike, I think the interesting thing about this is that progressive leaders like Chris get this, and they get this for a very long time. And it's because you forget that the CFO in the past has actually been responsible for a cost center themselves. So they're always being told, cut costs, improve what you do, cut costs. And the whole conversation now, I think it's fair to say, is it's now about you need to view yourself as a profit center or as an investment center, and you need to be adding value. So Chris, what do you say to that? Is it a very few people who actually think like that now because they've shifted towards being value adding?
Yeah, I think it's still a transition, right? And when you think of cost cutting just in nature and principle and application for the finance organization, that's always been the first place that we go, right? When it comes down to, and I think like there's so many other ways to look at different things besides cutting costs, right? Like, for example, optimization versus cutting costs can two completely different things, right? Like if you're optimizing, like a lot of organizations, when they think about extending out their costs or extending out their cash runway, the first place a traditional CFO is going to go to is like, hey, our people account for 70 to 85% of our costs. They count for the same in the cash flow. Let's just start there, right? But intuitively, that's your most valuable resource inside the organization is your people. So looking at it from like, okay, how are we optimizing our software spend, right? How are we making sure that we're looking at our contracting terms, right? Maybe you don't have the most favorable contracting terms. How are you making sure that you're looking at other ways besides going toward that traditional, hey, cut people costs? And you see a lot of that now, particularly in the US, right? There's like a Google document of shared layoffs that all these companies are having, right? And it's like, hey, the first place we want to go
they're
is
asking
cut the people.
ChatGPT. That's what they're doing.
Yeah,
They're asking
yeah,
ChatGPT for the layoff strategy.
yeah. And to me, I think there's a that should be when it comes down to cost cutting. That you have to get to that point at some point, but you want to make sure you've exhausted every leverage that you can. Besides when you start cutting those people and those most valuable resources inside your organization.
I like that because what went through my head as you were talking there is it's not all about the numbers, right? It's
Woohoo!
a lot of what you were just describing there is basically all of the other bits, the contracting terms, the optimization is before you hit the numbers.
I need a
Absolutely.
sound effect for that. That was
Yeah.
like anyone who says
It should be the one where it's like, "Brr, brr, brr, brr,
yeah,
brr."
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rewind.
You could probably clip what Chris just did then, and actually that could now be our sound
That is
effect.
Yeah, anytime somebody does it, "Brr, brr, 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 brr."
right. We got it. I'm gonna amplify that, and that's gonna be on the
Hey, guys, that'll be my ad lib, right? That's the Chris Ortega ad lib right there.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it.
excellent stuff. So look, yeah, Mike, you definitely touched the nerve there, but well done because you know that's what we like to do, provoke a bit of conversation here. And you know, Chris, I know that you are a great advocate for change in the finance industry. You do a great job at promoting sort of progressive thinking, and I wanted to sort of touch on, actually linked a little bit to what Mike was talking about. I saw a social post from yourself a couple of days ago, actually, I think it was, talking about how the finance industry needs to change. And, you know, we have a potentially quite a long way to go. And I don't want to get the quote wrong, but you didn't say that the finance industry or CFOs are laggards. But you certainly said that we've got a long way to go in comparison to, say, our marketing colleagues or our operations colleagues.
Yeah, so you know, I think one of the most important areas, looking at it from the fresh perspective, right? The fresh FP&A view of it is, you know, one of the biggest areas you compare to sales and marketing, right? When you look at other areas of the business, sales, marketing, operations, right? One of the key changes that needs to happen is just around technology adoption, right? The office of the CFO, traditionally, we have been so like reluctant to adopt technology, right? We got a laundry list and a checklist that we have to go through before we're like, yep, we want to implement that technology, right? Versus like sales and marketing, other operational areas inside the business that are a lot more earlier in that technology adoption curve. So I think that's one critical area where CFOs of the future can really value up and move along is technology adoption. I think the second key piece where CFOs have a great opportunity is learning the business, right? Chris and Mike, you'd be surprised how many times I talk to CFOs across the globe. I do a lot of thought leadership. I'm sitting in sessions, I'm leading sessions, moderating sessions with CFOs, and I ask them, "Tell me about your business." And they sit across from me and they're like, "Chris, I do the forecast, I do the forecast, I do the month end close, I do, you know, the audits, I do these things." But I'm like, "Hey, tell me about your ideal customer. Like, tell me about them. What are their pain points? What are their frustrations?" And they're just like deer in headlights, right? That's another opportunity is go learn the business, right? So many times finance, we're just stuck over in our corner, hammering away in our Excel spreadsheets, doing our financial modeling in our comfort zone, that it's really about the point that we need to get out and get that clarity inside the business. So another third area is just around this value mindset versus, and Mike touched it earlier, where it's like we're not just a cost center anymore. We're when I look in the organizations, the SMBs that we work with, and the guidance and clarity that we help give them, the buck stops with finance. We get to see everything in the organization. Every sales dinner that led to one of the biggest contracts, that led to revenue recognition, that led to cash, that led to an upsell, cross sell, right? We see everything in the business. So the more that we can help the business connect the dots to those bottom line results, not just hammering those bottom line results. It's a whole different mindset. And for me, I think those are really the three key areas where CFOs and the finance organization can really be technology adopters, right? We can really, you know, drive clarity inside the organization and we can make sure that, we're focusing on the right elements that bringing value to the business, not just being over in the corner, commanding, giving our spreadsheets, setting our budgets and forecasts. That's really where I think the opportunity and up level that we have.
What it sounds like you're describing to me is it's almost like the difference between like an audit function, which is your oversight and you're just looking and basically telling people off, for want of a better way of putting it, as opposed to what you've just described to me is much more a deeper understanding of the business that you're working in and actually helping tell the story of the business in a different way. So I really like that. Asking a CFO, do you understand the business? And they don't. But then linked to that value mindset bit about connecting the dots, that's about helping tell the story, right? That's about helping. You need to understand the business to be able to tell that story. And I really like that kind of flip round. I mean, is that what you're describing? That's it's more of a holistic service?
Absolutely. And everything we just talked about, right? Technology adoption, business understanding, and being a great connector inside the organization. These are things that, if I'm being very honest and vulnerable, I wasn't taught this on the CPA exam or the ACA exam. I wasn't taught this in my MBA school. I wasn't taught this in undergrad. These are things that are not traditionally taught to accounting finance professionals, right? We're taught debits and credits. We're taught IFRS. We're taught US GAAP. So a lot, and the key differentiator I want to say with that is a lot of these are not like textbook learned experiences. You got to take the leap of faith and experience these things, right? Experience what it means to have clarity of your business, experience adopting new technology, experience in being a great communicator and storyteller and connecting the dots in the business. To me, like when you look at the CEOs, business owners, and founders that we work with at Fresh FP&A, like that's the value that they're looking for, right? They're not looking for, hey, is Fresh FP&A going to be great in financial modeling, right? Are they going to be great in like closing our month-end close? Those are all like baseline expectations of finance. Like those are not going to give you pats on the back or gold stars. Those technology adoption, business understanding, being a great storyteller and communication, those are really the level up skill sets. And they're qualitative in nature, right? Those aren't quantitative skill sets.
That's really, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I find in the work that I do that is difficult is culture change is qualitative. It's very difficult to measure with numbers. You've given me an opening for the obvious question, which is you weren't trained in all of these things when you did your finance exams. So where did you pick up the kind of knowledge and skills that you're now applying in what you're doing?
Absolutely, man. I'm gonna be very honest and provocative when I say this, Mike. I have failed a lot. That's how I learned, right? Like I failed in technology adoptions that we've had, right? I failed in not having clarity of certain businesses or certain different things, right? I failed in telling horrible stories, right? I'll give everybody a great example of me failing at storytelling, which I think is a great skill. I was at a software company. I just come back from actually my last time over in London, and I came back. I was around our sales organization over here in London, and I was just so like in love with how they were running their sales organization, right? And I was coming back to the Americas, and this is an all company hands meeting. So I have all of our Americas team on the call, and we go into talking about America's sales. And I remember in front of everybody, I was talking about the UK's doing this, and this is what we need to change, and these are opportunities, and we just need to get better, right? And I was coming from a good place, but the sales leader right after sent me a Zoom message and was like, Chris, come to my office. We need to have a conversation, right? And it was a great moment for me because he's like, Chris, man, like we have great partnership, we have great communication, we have all these different things. Like you're a great finance partner that we love working with, but I felt like in that conversation you just threw us under the bus. And I remember getting Chris and Mike getting this news, and I was sitting there like, man, I messed up. Like, and I messed up in that moment. I failed, and I said, hey, man, how can I be better about this? Like, what could I do? What could I do better, right? And so my example in sharing that, man, is like a lot of times with developing some of these skills we talk about, you got to take the leap of faith, right? But you also got to recognize and say, hey, man, you may fail at it. But yeah. I've always taken a mindset that failure is just the first step towards learning, right? You either win or you learn, right? You only fail if you don't learn. So For me, it's like a mindset shift. It's finding those opportunities to exercise and begin to develop these skills. And it's also being very transparent about, hey man, you messed up. What did you learn from it?
You know what, Chris?
Well,
I recognize that that eagerness actually for a finance person to try and deliver a message that maybe no one else has seen, right? It's because of the nature of the job, there's no door in the company that's closed to you, right? So all of a sudden you're bringing this holistic point of view, and you're bringing information to a group of people. And funny enough, I made a very similar mistake early on in my career where I found a product line that was massively loss making in an organization, and at the quarterly update I did a quiz, and I was like, what's the lowest margin product in our organization? As soon as it finished, sales director on the phone to me, Chris, can I have a chat? We have an issue. You've literally just thrown a bit of information out there that has completely thrown the sales team under the bus. And I was like, but it was meant to provoke action, and it was meant to be interesting, and bring something different to the financial update. And he was like, yeah, I did all of that, but don't ever do that again. But I think, but what is the learning for you from that situation?
Yeah, the biggest learning for me, one thing is, first off, don't do that in an all company meeting. Don't do that. If all you leaders are out there, right? That's an individual conversation. That's a leader to leader conversation, right? That was really the first thing in the feedback that the salesperson gave to me was like, Chris, like we could have had that conversation and we could have aligned on a message that could have been better delivered together, right? And Chris, you're exactly right. My whole motivation around that was to kind of light some fires and have that healthy friction between finance and sales, right? So that was one of my first things, was making sure to have that. And the second thing is like, how can we implement, like, what are some of those things to say, not you need to make all these changes, but what are some things that we can adopt? Like, what's the strategy that we need to have to adopt some of these things that the UK sales team was actually doing well, right? So like, how can we put that into our processes? How can we put that in our strategies? That was the second key takeaway. And the third one was for me is like, in the VP of sales came to me, it's like, Chris, at the end of the day, like whether it's UK, APAC, or Americas, we're still all one organization. So it's not about pitting this team against that. Like at the end of the day, all the numbers drive up to the same numbers, right? So how can I make that less about of how can we be better, but more about how can I enable the team to take some of the things, the processes, the partnership, the cadence and how they've done to implement in our strategies to get better. And also keeping that conversation where it's not so broadly adopted. Because now, as a person outside looking in, they're like, oh man, is finance against sales? Is sales against finance? Those are really, I think, for me, the three key takeaways I took away from that conversation and really learned, right? And to me, it ties back to what Mike said earlier, right? In building that connective dots, that would be my star guide to help people, man, is like keep those things in focus, make sure you're focused on the value and the partnership. And those were the key things I learned from it.
Chris and I ran a session a month or so ago now where we were talking about what have we learned from failure. And it's just really interesting you bringing failure into this discussion, because I think it's a key thing that we don't talk about enough is that. But to Chris's point to the other one's point a moment ago around
the much cooler Chris.
Well, we could have a LinkedIn vote.
I'll take it.
The intention of what you both did in the circumstances you described was the right one. You were trying to draw attention to something, point something out, and get the right effect. The impact wasn't what you expected. And what it sounds like to me, one of the things that was kind of key in that was probably patience and being a bit more patient about taking action. And I just wondered, from if you consider that patience is important when you're taking these learning points forward, how important also is empathy and listening? So you're being empathetic to the people receiving the message. And was that a learning point in there as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So you talked about patience and empathy, and I think patience, I'm going to be vulnerable and honest with everybody, right? Patience is not my strong suit. I did a DISC assessment. It's called predictive index. and it's basically one of those personality tools. And it showed like, hey, and Chris, one of the things that Chris doesn't do well, he's impatient for results. So like patience is not a skill set of mine. So me being self-aware and knowing that patience isn't a skill set of mine, I'm intentional about being patient. Like I focus and say, Chris, slow down. Like just slow down. Because sometimes slowing down can help you speed up, right? Going slow when you're moving fast all the time. And honestly, I learned this through failure earlier in my career as well too. I was always so impatient for wins. Like I wanted to get wins. I wanted to get numbers up on the board. I wanted to get my team success, right? And I had to learn and say, Chris, really great things may take 6 to 8 months of time. It may take a lot of focus and dedication, but and the thing I learned through like when I'm self-aware and be patient is I fell in love with the process instead of the result, right? When you're impatient for results, I've always looked at that impatient. I want the result. The result was what gave me the warm and fuzzies and the really great high moments. But the moment that I slowed down and really practiced and was self-aware that I need to be patient, that's when I started falling in love with the process it was giving me, right? So, like, patience for finance leaders is a superpower. The second thing is empathy, right? Empathy, not sympathy. They're two different things. And too many times, like, empathy is taking that moment and being in that other person's shoes and seeing it the way that a marketing person sees finance, or seeing it the way a salesperson looks at the business, or seeing it the way an HR person looks at people. Empathy and empathetic data driven decision making as a framework is tremendous, right? And that framework is very simple. You look at people drive processes, processes turn into data, data's turned into information, information shared through knowledge, knowledge to ultimately make a business decision. People, process, data, information, knowledge, decision. That's an empathetic, data driven framework that, I was like, this is the way to do it, right? If you go deeply understand, let's take a great example. Say for sales, right? One of the business decisions that you need to make is, do we need to hire more salespeople to increase our revenue from 30 to 50% growth year over year, right? That's the decision you want to get to, right? But go understand the people first. Go inside the organization and say, do we really need to hire more salespeople, right? Or is it way to process optimize? How's the sales team feeling about if they have to go from 30% growth rate to 50% growth rate, right? How do they feel? What is their pains? What is their frustrations around this? What is their viewpoint, right? And too many times that whole framework, finances just goes in. We do our Excel spreadsheets and say, hey, if we want to meet this target, we got to have sales over 50%. Finance goes tell sales they need to get 50% year over year growth rate, right?
Yeah.
We do that so much. But if we take that framework and go deep, this gets back to what we talked about earlier, right? Understanding the business. And
Yeah.
for everybody listening, a golden nugget. If you want to take immediate action and a practical tip to go learn the business right now that you're in, irregardless of what role that you're in, go learn the sales side of your business. Go learn it, right? So for me, tying that patience and bringing that empathy into finance, that value partnership that we talk about, that fresh CFO mindset of the future, that is where we win, right? That if you're a patient leader, if you're an empathetic leader, right? You look at that, and those are more EQ skill sets, right? Those are more EQ kind of things versus like, hey, I'm a great financial modeler. I'm a great I know IRFS 15 and ASC 606 like the back of my hand, which is very IQ skill set. You balance those on a weight scale to the business, right? And you look at that weight and they say, hey, do you want which finance do you want? What CFO do you want? They're going to take a patient, empathetic, tech driven, understands the business, and connector CFO finance professional every day of the week.
I love it.
So
I love it. I love it. There's so much in there, and I think we can tell what drives you, which is like adding value. And I do think, as someone who knows you a little bit, Chris, I think one thing that I see, which I think really makes you a standout leader, is that you're prepared to talk openly about this stuff, and you're prepared to work on it, including, mindset and attitude and those sorts of things. Where I think a lot of people in leadership, don't necessarily prioritize that, and maybe that's unfair, but certainly we're potentially outliers in the accounting and finance space. So credit to you. Just to sort of wrap that up, is there sort of one thing along Chris's journey that has led to all this? What is sort of driving you? And by the way, I love the fact that your initials are CEO.
Let's go. Yeah, man. Yeah, so great question. What's the thing that kind of drove this, man? I think for me, like, it started probably early. If I can go like to one, man, I have to go probably even further along than that. I think like the journey that got me down the road that I'm at right now, not only being the CEO of Fresh FP&A and all these different things and thinking about things differently, before I knew it, I would probably say it was probably when I was 8 years old. And I'll set the precedent, set the context for everybody. So, I'm 8 years old. I'm in third grade. I'm over at my grandma's house on a Saturday afternoon. Just had a milk chocolate with my grandma. My mom comes up to me and she grabs me, right? And I'll never forget this moment. This was very impactful for me. My mom grabs me, she sits me on her lap, and she's talking with me, and she says, Bunny, which is her nickname for me. She says, Bunny, you have the best initials in the world. Kind of hits what Chris talked about. You got the best initials in the world. And I was like, I remember that moment looking up at her and I was like, wow, what my initials? And she's like, your initials are CEO. Your initials are the highest level that you can ever reach in business. Like, that's the highest level you can get to. I remember that moment sitting in her lap and internalizing that. And my mind is spinning. And the first thing that comes out of my mouth was, Mom, I can be a fireman in business. And she's like, yes, you can be a fireman in business. Like, no doubt about it. You got this, right? And to me, like that moment in my life, like even when I was, I come and just sharing about my personal life. Like I grew up, Chris and Mike, low income, single parent background. I grew up poor. I grew up in the hood. Like I never had the silver spoon, never had like the best of anything, right? So I've always had this idea of like, hey, I know like if I want to get better, I gotta find and make opportunities for me to be better. I gotta put myself in an experience to get better. And I gotta also be self-aware and look at myself and say, hey, Chris, there's really ways to you improve, right? And I'll just be transparent for everybody. I'm still learning a lot of these things. I would not sit here and say that I have mastery level, doctorate, PhD level of, empathy, patience, technology adoption. I'm still a learning process. I'm still learning. I'm still growing and improving, but I'm self-aware to know that it's all a process, right? And you got to be comfortable. It gets back to a lot of finance professionals. The reason why we go into accounting and finance is because if you look at accounting, at the base form of accounting, really break it down to its roots. Accounting is business algebra, right? Assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity, right? That's the fundamental accounting equation. X equals Y plus Z. It's algebra. It's basically algebra, right? So, for me, I think like it's been that whole like life, it's been that whole professional journey, it's been that whole opportunity of failure, it's been that whole opportunity of looking back at myself and saying, man, Chris, like, yeah, you need to step it up, you need to get better, or you failed in this. And it's all part of the process. And get back to what I mentioned earlier, right? Falling in love with the journey has changed my life, not only as a finance professional, not only as a fractional CFO and serving our clients, not only in leading Fresh FP&A, but just as a person.
Yeah.
Falling in love with that has really opened doors and really expanded my skill set, my mindset, and the value that I want to bring. So, Chris, I know that's a long answer, but
No.
I would say like that is probably the experience that was the catalyst, was that fire in my journey.
I love it. I love it. Well, and again, thank you for being so candid about that. It's and it's almost a philosophical point at the end there, but it's so true, right? If you can enjoy the journey rather than just bitch about not being at the destination, then I'm sure you're going to enjoy it a lot more. But it's normally at this point that we ask a question. And if you do want to ask us a question, it's podcast@generationcfo.com who produce this. or reach out to Mike and myself via LinkedIn. The statement is never hire anyone in finance if they didn't either show or have a willingness to learn technology. Now, I know you've already touched on this, but I think it's interesting that this is so specific now. It's like it has to be part of the attitude, or there is not any value from that finance talent. What do you say to that?
I think in hearing that question, right, is don't hire anybody in finance if they don't have any inclination to technology. I think like I look at that as like a broader statement. I want to get to like root cause. Like to me, I think that what if you would have identified like what that core competency is lacking, right? A finance person that never wants to adopt technology. That probably is saying like they lack curiosity, right, as a core competency, right? Because technology, there's all kind of new technology, right? And so getting to the core competency side of it is saying that's a person that probably doesn't like curiosity, right? That's a person that probably doesn't lack they don't like change. They like, hey, I like the same way I'm doing stuff. And that's somebody that's pretty seems to me pretty rigid in terms of what they want to do, right? So if I was to break that down into core competencies and say, if those questions tie to those core competencies, yeah, definitely, right? But there's been people I've hired on my finance team that, they have the technology. It's not like they were like lacking and never opposed to it, right? It's
Yeah.
just they had the technology that they were working with, right? And if they were curious or wanted to adapt to new technology, that's a whole different thing. So I think the question you can't go like left or right on it because you got to really diagnose is like what is the root cause? What is the core competencies that finance person is lacking, right?
It's a good point. It's
Because
a good point.
technology's here. Technology's here.
It's a good point. And I think maybe the answer was coming from a point of view of the agility, statement. It's almost like, is this a proxy to trying to work out someone's agility? Because if you ask someone, how agile are you or how adaptable are you, they'll give you some answer. But actually, if you say what technology have you learned, or what's your interest in technology, maybe it's a proxy for it.
Well, when I saw this statement, my initial response is, it's never hire anyone in finance if they don't. And I'm thinking, well, how would you ask that question? How would you ask a question when hiring around technology? It's like, have you learned how to use R? Have you learned how to use, it's a difficult question. I really like the way that, Chris, you just put that about, okay, so what is underneath that question, which is around that curiosity, adaptability, because you can ask questions around curiosity and adaptability, and it doesn't need to relate to technology. In some respects, are you prepared to reevaluate business processes? Are you constantly looking to evolve the business? Nothing to do with technology, but shows that you probably will be the kind of person that would be happy to adopt new approaches, new technology. So yeah, it's almost like Chris answered my kind of query on the statement before I got to the query on the statement, if that makes sense.
If
I could just add to what Mike said, right? I think it's like people that are not like technology adopters, right? Like it may be a reason why. Like, what's the catalyst that hasn't brought them over? Maybe they had a bad experience, or maybe they never had a leader that really came from a finance perspective that was an advocate of technology, right? So I think that question is a little biased because that resource may not have the leadership, may not even been in the environment, may not even been part of the culture that they were a part of where that was important. So I think completely discounting somebody that doesn't have that technology experience, or it's really a disservice. And to me, it's like get deeper. What are those core competencies that you think a technology person is lacking? Then you could, to Mike, what you said, then you can really test on those and say, hey, give me a time where you had to practice agility in a finance organization, or what are you curious about in finance right now, right? Those are things that you can really get to. What is the core driver of that behavior?
So here we go. Let's just flip this. I'm conscious of time, so we'll keep the answers short. But I just want to flip this around, right? This was almost manager hiring team, right? But what if you go the other way around? Chris, if you are working with a CFO or a fractional CFO who's not prepared to talk technology to you, should you be working with them?
Yeah, I mean, I that's a really good question. I think for me, it is trying to diagnose and I wouldn't completely like dismiss not working with that person. This is about the empathy side that we talked about, right? Like, my first question on that piece to answer that would be, help me understand why. Like, help me understand, like, what is it? What is it specifically about technology in the finance organization that you are reluctant to? Like, I a great leader, his name is Sean Brady. He taught me this, man. And this gets back to me learning as a leader, right? Seek first to understand, then be understood. So, like in that great example you talked about, I would come from a basis of trying to understand. Empathy, I would try to live a what's that shoe look like for that person? Because you never know. But completely discounting and saying, hey, you're a fractional CFO, you haven't used QuickBooks, NetSuite, Tableau, Power BI, ChatGPT, Gemini, you haven't
Yeah,
used all these technologies, and just completely saying, nope,
yeah.
you're not going to be part of Fresh FP&A. I think that would be a disservice
Like,
to the team.
lovely. Look, I'm conscious of time, and we've answered that question very well. And I know that Chris needs to get back to his natural light bathing to get over his jet lag. So um, let's shift on to good data, bad data. I'll start off with, and this is just an opportunity to talk about a few things that have tickled us this week. So I mentioned the research report earlier. There was another finding in this research report that Gen CFO run that 85% of leaders welcome agile transformation. It's kind of relevant to the conversation we just had, actually. But Mike obviously asked, what about the other 15%? I think what's interesting with the agile transformation research that we found was that people are generally acceptant. 85% in leadership is a pretty good number, given that there's a lot of priorities out there. I think when you dig into it, not many people had actually started that transformation. Everyone said, I think there's about 15% said they were actually doing the agile transformation, but then there was a large majority, like 50%, that were just about to start. And we know what that means. So it's good data in that we've got a lot of people supporting a shift towards this more agile approach and being less fixed in our approach. But the reality is, I'm afraid, and I don't want to turn it into bad data, Mike, because you tell me off for doing that, that not everyone's doing it, right?
So, I mean, my response to that is yes. I think you almost answered the question in the question there. I'm not even sure what to say.
Okay, note to self: stop answering the question. Ask the question and shut up. Anyway, and bad data. What have we got?
So I'm afraid I couldn't avoid going Middle East political comments. We don't do any kind of commentary on politics really, but this one just struck me as that, like, it was 2 nights ago that Iran launched over 300 drones and missiles at Israel. Ignoring for a minute that the whys and the wherefores of that actually happening, it's been deemed a success because 99% of those missiles and drones were knocked out of the sky before they landed, which is, you can see as from an Israeli perspective, is a good thing, but 1% hit. And there's no talk at the moment about the 1% hit that hit, the carnage that that's probably caused, the impact that that's had on the civilian populations. And it just struck me that it's bad data because we're focusing on that being a success rather than actually being a horrible thing.
Yeah, I definitely seen the news, and my heart goes out to all the families affected by this, man. And
Yeah.
it's a sad and unfortunate situation. And my sympathy, my thoughts and prayers are with all the families that are affected by this situation right now.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's definitely bad data on every front. But thanks for that one, Mike. Cheers for bringing us back to reality.
There may be a format question that we always end with bad data. Maybe that's a
no. I like it. I like ending with bad data. It adjusts the tone before we finish on a high.
Okay, fair enough.
But anyway, and that high is now. So Chris Ortega, thank you very much for being part of today. There were a couple of things that I thought were fantastic. I loved the whole failure is learning message. Obviously, the CEO, the 8-year-old CEO, fantastic image for our podcasts, and the very candid story. No surprises at town halls, please. I think that's
Absolutely.
probably the leadership message from you. But what's the best way of getting hold of you?
Yeah, so if you want to connect with me, I'm all over LinkedIn. Just Chris Ortega, or type in Fresh CFO. If you want to learn more about Fresh FP&A and how we empower SMB businesses with financial clarity and confidence, check out www.freshfpa.com. And if you want to follow us on all of our socials, it's just Fresh FPA on all the socials. And Chris and Mike, thank you so much for this opportunity. And Chris Argent, man, thank you so much, man, for everything, for giving back, for giving me this opportunity and a platform to have this great conversation with you two. You are a beacon of bringing that fresh mindset to CFOs, not only with the Gen CFO, and I know you got a lot of events and things coming up here in Europe and over some of the US, but thank you for your leadership and leading from the front, man.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. See, Mike, somebody does think I'm something.
I think we all think that you're something, Chris, but it's just sometimes it's undescribable. I was going to say, just based on that, I've got a takeaway that you didn't mention there, which is if we'd just had a little chat beforehand, we'd have known that we could have gone Chris and Bunny rather than me having the trouble that I've had with multiple Chris's today.
Yeah, if you need me to translate, Chris, he meant bunny instead of
Bunny.
his
Bunny. Yeah,
his brummy, bunny.
Yeah. Bunny. Yeah. But I do, Mike, sometimes get the Bert and Ernie, because like sometimes if you look at me, I look like, I don't know what I look like, Bert and Ernie, because I have my dog's name is Ernie. And like sometimes I have Ernie and it's like me together and I'm like, it's Bert and Ernie, and people like laugh. And I'm like, ha, he does look like a Muppet. So
Awesome.
Yeah, let's go with Lewis Hamilton. I think we'll go with that on the notes. But look, thanks very much again, Chris. Thank you from me. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
And remember, it's not all about the numbers.